Good evening, I'm Joanne Witt. I'm the pastor here at First Presbyterian Church, and I'm glad you're here, thrilled you're here, and happy that you're joining us tonight as we kick off our Green Chautauqua speaker series. The Chautauqua was a series of learning experiences about matters of interest and significant to adults in the late 19th and early 20th century, basically before TV or radio. Chautauqua became synonymous with bringing the information that people needed and wanted to the people where they were. And so we're celebrating that tradition and reviving the name to do just that, with regard to what is probably the crisis of our lifetime. If you're wondering why a church is doing this, why a church is offering a series on global warming, I don't want to take up too much time on that topic right now. I'll send you to our website. We've got information and my blog about that. Also take a look at the whole website as long as you're there. But without getting too theological, in a nutshell, I'll say that this congregation is a progressive, justice and peace and people-loving congregation, and you can't care about people or any other creature if you don't also care about the earth that sustains us all. So that's why we're here. This is a community effort, and we're thrilled that 350 Marin and 350 Bay Area have come on board. If you'd like to be kept informed about our future speaker events, please do sign those sheets of paper that are scattered around the pews or that are available out in the narthex so we can have your contact information. So we've invited Dr. Fitzpatrick to be our guinea pig for this series. We're delighted that she has agreed. Melanie Fitzpatrick is a climate scientist with the Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Her work encompasses basic climate research and global and local consequences of climate change, and then communicating the scientific findings to policymakers, media, and citizens. Her PhD is from UW in Seattle, and over the last 2 decades, she's conducted and supported global change science programs in Antarctica. She spent time in Greenland and Alaska, and she continues to be passionate about ensuring that government policies are informed by the best science available. Dr. Fitzpatrick has been cited by the New York Times, USA Today, and the Associated Press and Reuters. We are thrilled that she is here. She plans to speak for a while and then leave some time open for questions, and we welcome you.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you for the beautiful music played beforehand. That was really lovely. So I want to gauge the audience that I'm talking to. So with a show of hands, how many of you in this audience are either very concerned or even alarmed at climate change? I've said this before in Marin, you are a unique audience. When you ask that question of the general US population, you're lucky to get 1 in 5 people who says they're alarmed about this issue. Almost every hand in the room just went up. So I know I'm talking to a special group. I know I'm talking to a special group because we're in California. Not only that, we're in Northern California. And not only that, we're in Marin County. But you are a special group. You are trendsetters. And my invitation to you tonight, as you listen, as you ask questions, as you enter discussion, is to ask how you can bring the rest of the country along with you, because that is your task. So that's what I ask of you tonight. How can you bring the rest of the country along to where you are? Because what we need for this issue is a social tipping point. So I want to cover a few things tonight. Firstly, I want to explain who I am and why I'm standing here in front of you tonight, give you some of my story. And then I do want to cover some of the basic science because I think it's important that you have that in your toolbox when you talk to people. And then I really want to talk about community action and why it's so important at this time. So, a couple of decades ago, I fell in love. I fell in love with a vast, white, indescribably beautiful place called Antarctica. And that passion, that infatuation has continued to this day. This place is amazing. It's hard to get to. It's ringed by the world's roughest ocean. It's got the harshest weather on the continent. And for me, it represents one of the most beautiful places on the planet that I'm trying to protect through my work. This is what motivates me to communicate about climate change. But I know that every person in the room has a similar sense of place, a place that's special to you, and a place that really motivates you to want to care for the planet. My love affair started in 1992, and like all young love, it was full of excitement, passion, possibility. I was privileged to be Australia's first female glaciologist. I went down with a small team, part of an international effort to look at the clues that the ice hold for us in Antarctica. It's been a lifelong passion. I've now spent 9 summers in Antarctica and a winter. And I continue to work with international researchers and scientists around the world. And now in my role at the Union of Concerned Scientists, I continue to communicate why it's so important that we have this science continue. Antarctica is a pristine laboratory. And what it holds for us is somewhere that we can actually look into the past. It's like a time machine. So as we drill into the ice, into the great ice sheet that's just laid down from snow, we actually go back in time. And it's such a unique repository. And it's also a fabulously beautiful place to spend time. So it's an arduous place to work. You spend a lot of time with small groups of people in harsh conditions. But what it's taught me is that it takes hard work to find knowledge. And it's that knowledge that has given us what we know about climate change today. It literally is the end of the Earth in Antarctica. And what I love about this work is that the researchers that I work with, they share my passion for this planet. And I want you to know that there are thousands of scientists like me who are passionate about the Earth. Some of them work on coral reefs. Some of them work on rainforests. Some of them work on remote mountain ranges. Some of them work in deserts. But together we are trying to put a story about Earth's past history and Earth's climate together so that we can make decisions about the future, so that we know what's happening in the present and its context in the past. You might ask what drives a scientist to do this? And I'm still trying to answer that question myself. On day 46 of a 90-day field expedition, I wonder when I have to get out of bed and make breakfast for the rest of the crew, I wonder what I'm doing there, but I continue to go back. And what we're doing there is searching for those clues of past climate. And in my role as an ice core glaciologist, I actually look at bubbles in ice. Sounds pretty esoteric, but it's actually quite beautiful to look for these small bubbles. This piece of ice from an ice core that would be 3 feet long, a couple of inches in diameter, it's ancient air. It's been trapped there when the snow fell tens of thousands of years ago. It's an archive of past climate. It tells us about glaciations that have come and gone. It tells us that climate has always been changing. It also tells us about volcanic events. Ash and dust release those secrets. And it tells us about sunspot cycles. So this is actually a story that I'm holding in my hand. I've mentioned how beautiful it is, how it touches me in my heart, and how I want to protect and care for this place and other beautiful places on the planet. And now I want to go through some of the basic science Because in your role as people who are going to continue taking this message to other people, I think you need to know some of the fundamentals. When we extract the gas from these bubbles, and it's quite a process, so what I'll do is I'll have an ice cube shaped size of an ice core, so I will have cut it on a bandsaw. I actually put it in a vacuum, and then I grate it on a cheese grater and extract the gas. And that's ancient air that can tell me all sorts of things. I can look for isotopes that tell me about temperature. I can look for acids that tell me about sunlight. I can even see local storms that have happened in the vicinity of that part of Antarctica. From the gases in the bubbles, I can tell you the carbon dioxide, the oxygen, the nitrogen, the methane, all of those are in the record of these very, very tiny amounts of gas. And what we know is that climate has constantly changed, but it's changed between two different levels for about 1 million years. We now know the ice core record goes back about 5 times as long as humans have walked the planet. It goes back roughly 1 million years ago. So 800,000 years, ice cores telling us year in, year out what's been going on. The Earth has a carbon dioxide blanket around it naturally. And during an ice age, the level of carbon dioxide is about 180 parts per million. So every million molecules of air, 180 parts of them, 180 of them are carbon dioxide. And I like to talk about a two-blanket duvet. So during an ice age, humans have lived through ice ages. We've had this two-blanket duvet on the Earth. As the planet warms up, because of slight wobbles in its orbit, the carbon dioxide increases to about 280 parts per million. So roughly 300. I like to call that a three-blanket duvet. We've been going between this 2- and 3-blanket duvet for almost 1 million years. And what you and I and our ancestors have done in the last 200 years is we've dug up ancient solar energy in the form of coal, oil, and natural gas, and we've actually added to that blanket that keeps us warm. Last year, as you all know, we hit 400 parts per million, so we've added another blanket on top. And here's what I want you to take away from today. It's how fast this is happening. So if you look at the science, you can actually see that coming out of an ice age is about a blanket's worth of carbon dioxide. We've added another blanket on top. And coming out of that ice age, the temperature difference between an ice age and a warm period is about 12 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what it takes to come out of an ice age. But it takes about 10,000 years. So you're talking about 12 degrees Fahrenheit in 10,000 years. Let's do the math. That means it's about 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit in 1,000 years. And unfortunately, we've seen that warming over the last 100 years. So the scale of what we're dealing with is something that's unprecedented, certainly in the ice core record. And we think scientifically that we haven't seen this for 20 million years. So we've added this blanket, and we are watching the Earth warm up. You all know that this is leading to climate change. I don't need to tell you that we're seeing heat waves, we're seeing sea level rise, we're seeing extreme precipitation events and severe droughts. We're potentially seeing a drought right now, which might be a harbinger of climate change in California. But here's something to take away with you. 2013 was the 37th year in a row above global average. That means every young person in this room, and there are some of them, they've never lived through an average year. So they're not living in their parents' climate. They're actually living in a different climate already. We know that every single year this millennium, from 2001 to 2013, makes it into the top 15 warmest years on record. And we know that each decade of the last 3 has been warming. And I get frustrated as a scientist when I hear about a pause and a hiatus in warming. It's simply not there in the record. And I'll come to that a bit later. So I could go on. I could tell you about Arctic sea ice decline, but you know that. I could tell you about ocean warming, but you know that too, or maybe you don't. The ocean is actually absorbing most of the heat that we're seeing. We're only seeing a fraction of it in the land and the atmosphere. I could tell you about sea level rise, but you know that too. So the science, yes, the science is in, but you still need to know the basics. You still need to be able to tell that to your family, your friends, the people who still don't know this information. And then I could tell you specifically about climate change in California, but again, there are other resources and other places to go. We know that what we're dealing with is different from weather. Weather is what we get day to day. Climate is what you expect over the long term. And there are many, many climate records that are shifting into something different. The most important thing to realise, though, is that climate scientists agree. It's unequivocal that humans are changing the climate, and what we're seeing over the last 50 years is really due to our emissions of fossil fuels. There's consensus amongst climate scientists. 97% of climate scientists agree with the facts. Not only that, more than a dozen national academies of sciences agree with the facts, hundreds of institutions, and as I said, thousands of scientists like me who do the research day to day. The latest studies show that over the last 2 decades, there have been about 14,000 peer-reviewed climate articles. And of those 14,000, a fraction of 1% reject global warming. So we know the message is overwhelming that this is happening. So here's where you come in. This is what happens when you ask people if they're alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, or dismissive of climate change. This is where our 1 in 5 number comes from. There's only 1 in 5 Americans who are alarmed about this issue. So you need to help change public opinion. You need to talk to people, you need to write letters to the editor, you need to contact legislators. It's up to the groundswell to actually shift public opinion on this. I challenge you to talk to someone who has different politics from you. See if you can actually tell them about what you've learnt tonight or what you already know. It's taken the President a long time, but this week he said the debate is settled. Climate change is a fact. So we know it. We need to go out there and spread the word. So what's the disconnect? Why has it taken so long? Well, this is also not going to be news to you. There's an incredible bias in the media that is largely driven by fossil fuel interests. Now, the Union of Concerned Scientists has done several reports on this over the years, looking at the techniques and the methods and the funding behind a disinformation campaign about climate science. We know the techniques because we know that big coal, big oil are using exactly the same PR companies that big tobacco used. And their method is simply to sow doubt in the science. They don't need to put forth any ideas about why it's not happening. They don't even need to put forth any proof. They simply seed doubt around the science, and we've seen this before. So I encourage you to go to our website, Fight Disinformation, find out more about this, because this is also a story that needs to be told. This is a story that needs to be exposed. We're currently doing a project at the moment to see if we can actually account for how much global warming is due to some of the companies that we can recognise as being the ones who've drilled the oil and found the coal. So we're calling it an attribution project. Can we attribute a certain amount of global warming to certain companies? So I encourage you to have a look at that. Science can inform and we can advocate, but it is up to the wider population to carry this issue. Everyone in this room knows we need to decarbonise. Everyone knows we have a limited budget within to work. And what this is going to require really is radical action. This is a moral and ethical issue, and it is the issue of our time. But we've done it before. We did it during World War II. We completely retooled our economy, not just in this country, but worldwide. That is the kind of effort that this issue will take. And I want to talk about hope for a minute, because I know there's a lot of people in this room who are feeling overwhelmed by this. The science there's no good news in the science. But what we need to find inside ourselves is some way of moving forward despite the bad news every day. And I can tell you, I deal with it every day. Václav Havel's a Czech poet, playwright, activist, politician. He died a couple of years ago. And he has a great quote about hope. He says, "Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well. Hope is the certainty that what you are doing makes sense regardless of the outcome." So hope is the certainty that what you are doing makes sense regardless of the outcome. And I think that speaks to this issue, because we do need to think that we are making a difference, but we don't know what that end product is going to be. What we're dealing with is a multi-generational issue. The carbon dioxide that you and I emitted getting here tonight has a very long lifetime. About a third of it will be gone this century. Two-thirds of it will still remain at the end of the century. And a third of it will still exist 1,000 years from now. So it may be that we need to find a way to extract that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We also know that it's largely you and I that are responsible for this. So it's our industrialised Western countries that still are responsible for 75% of the emissions that are still in the air. Sure, there are countries that are catching up, like China, Brazil, India, but because of the long lifetime of carbon dioxide, it's you and I that really bear the responsibility of this. And this is very evident where climate equity comes into concern. So as a scientist, I can't stand up here and say that Typhoon Haiyan was because of climate change. But I can tell you that climate change may increase the odds of those kind of typhoons and hurricanes happening. At the moment, we only have enough historical data to say that about the North Atlantic. The North Atlantic has seen certainly an intensity of hurricanes that we haven't seen anywhere else. But what we are doing with increasing this blanket is we're loading the dice for these kind of things to happen more often. And largely, we can actually cope with them. We have some resilience, certainly in this country. Look at Hurricane Katrina, look at Hurricane Sandy. But sea level rise that's affecting island communities like the Maldives, increases in storms that are affecting places like the Philippines, Bangladesh, they're not countries that can cope. They're also not countries that contributed much to the problem. So we have a choice right now. We have a choice of continuing on this high emission pathway, or we have a choice on switching to a low emission future. And it's very important that the people in this room know how urgent it is and how key it is that you're in this issue, that you're actually at the table. It's going to take a community response on many, many different levels. And it's not going to be easy. We're going to need bravery, we're going to need fortitude, we're going to need courage. There are many different avenues for doing this. There's energy efficiency, there's renewables, ramping up renewables, there's cutting out oil use. All of those things that you know about. And all of those different ways are important. We need them all. And we need all the different groups that are working on this. But I think this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to create a different world, to have a vision for a world that is quite different. It only took us a few decades to get off whale oil, so I'm convinced that we can wean ourselves off fossil fuels quicker than that if we want to. We know there's a global carbon budget. We know there's a global carbon budget that we have to work with, but we also know the solutions already. You're living in a place that's already putting them into place. We know that it takes sustainable, resilient communities. We know that we need efficient appliances, efficient cars. We need to reduce our energy consumption. We need less consumption of stuff. And we need to question the core of what's driving our lives. And I think this is an opportunity for transformation. We wrote a book a couple of years ago. We've been taking it on tour to show how the average person can change things. But the average person isn't enough, and you all know that as well. And I want to point out that there is a success story. It's called California. Might not feel like it, but you have a Global Warming Solutions Act. You have a renewable energy portfolio standard. You have vehicle emission standards. The rest of the world is actually watching what is happening here. And they're watching because once you get it working, people can lift it and follow. Lots of other states in the country are watching what's happening in California. Despite what you might feel, you are actually a world leader and you are showing the way for other countries and other states. And we all know that whatever happens in California eventually happens everywhere else in the world. So one of my messages is that you should take heart that there is also action worldwide. There might not have been some good decisions from Congress this week, but we know there are many, many countries that are taking this issue seriously. We know there are environmental groups, social justice groups, Indigenous groups, faith communities all around the world. And I like to bring up Paul Hawken's idea that all of these groups, these millions and millions of people, are actually Earth's immune system fighting back. And that's what you need to be. You need to be part of Earth's immune system. It's uncoordinated, there's no one driving it, but it definitely is happening. And it's happening in communities like this that are looking towards sustainability and resilience. And finally, for those of you who are in the deep, dark pit of despair, and I know there are some of you there, I want you to climb out. I want you to climb out of that deep, dark pit. I know this issue is overwhelming. I know there's not much good news on the science front. But I think it's essential that we realise that we have to tackle this together. We actually have to have strong community to be able to tackle this issue. If it's not going to be us, then who is it going to be? If it's not going to be here, then where is it going to be? And if it's not going to be now, then when is it going to be? The actions that matter are the ones that make us feel like strong, robust communities that are making a difference. So I invite you to be that social tipping point that we need on this issue. I work for an organisation that has 350,000 supporters. Find an organisation like mine or one of the local ones here and actually start working with them. And I'd like to finish with a poem. It's by a local poet called Drew Dellinger. Some of you may have heard it. It goes like this. It's 3:23 in the morning and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unravelling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, and birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? Thank you for listening.